Hello everyone, my name is Anchovies, and in today's video, we're going to be doing a Layla guide. It's going to be an in-depth guide for everything regarding Layla, like her builds, what her role in the game is, as well as teams that she can be played in. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started, starting with her role in the game. So Layla is primarily a shielder. She's a really strong shielder at that, and she also provides some minor off-field application through her elemental skill and her elemental burst. Starting with her kit, mainly centering on her elemental skill and her elemental burst, because her normal attacks do not do much within her kit, if anything at all. Her elemental skill deals damage in a very small AoE. Then it'll create a Curtain of Slumber shield. Now this shield absorbs based on Layla's max HP, and it will absorb cryo damage more effectively. It will also briefly apply cryo to Layla upon creation. While her shield is active, it'll create 1 night star every 1.5 seconds, and you can have at most 4 stars. You can also create 2 stars when characters use their elemental skills. Now when Layla has 4 stars, then each of the stars will shoot at intervals, hitting enemies. Another thing to note about the stars is that new stars cannot be made until the previous stars are fired. Her shield has a 12-second duration at base and a 12-second cooldown, which means that she effectively has 100% uptime on this ability. The same is the case with her Elemental Burst, which also has a 12-second duration and a 12-second cooldown. When you cast an Elemental Burst, it'll summon a Celestial Dream Sphere, or as I like to refer to it as a cute little disco ball. And while this disco ball is active, it'll constantly shoot Starlight Slugs that deal AoE cryo damage that is based on Layla's max HP. Slugs that hit enemies will create an additional Night Star, meaning that you often want to have her Elemental Burst pretty much every rotation, so that way you can generate those extra Night Stars. And with a 40 energy cost, things like energy requirements are going to be of little concern to Layla unless she is in a situation where she is the only cryo unit. Now moving on to her passives, for her first passive, while her shield is active, she will trigger the Deep Sleep effect for every Night Star that she gets. And for each Night Star that she gets, she'll gain 1 stack, which increases her shield strength, and she can have at most 4 stacks, which is equivalent to 24% shield strength, which allows Layla's shield to be more effective against enemies, especially ones that hit a little bit harder. For her second passive, her shield star damage is increased by 1.5% of her max HP. This is not a super significant increase, but it is still a nice damage boost nonetheless to give her some additional chip damage. Now as for what talents, honestly, because of the fact that I mainly mentioned her elemental skill and burst, these are really going to be the only 2 you want to level, and even then, you can just opt to level only her elemental skill if you don't really care about her burst damage. However, in my opinion, I do think that her burst does enough damage to where it is fine to put in some level of investment into it. Of course, her elemental skill is her main priority though at the end of the day. Let's now transition into her constellations. So her first constellation increases her shield's absorption by 20%, as well as summoning shield for nearby allies. So this is good for the co-op girlies who love co-op. You can of course now use Layla in co-op more effectively. And the shield on this mode shares basically the same exact properties as her normal shield, just with 35% of its absorption instead. So even at a baseline, this is definitely one of Layla's more important constellations, mainly for the fact that it increases her shield's absorption, which allows her shield to take in more damage before breaking. Layla's Constellation 2 makes it so that her shield's star shots on hit will restore 1 energy to Layla. This makes it nice in situations where if Layla is the only cryo unit, then it will give her enough energy to at least not have to build as much energy in her stats to burst every rotation. Layla's Constellation 3 increases her elemental skills level by 3, and with this 3 level increase, this of course is nice for her shield because it gives it an increased base absorption, as well as additional chip damage for her shield. Her Constellation 4 is also another significant constellation, as it increases the normal and charge attack damage to the team based on 5% of Layla's max HP when her shield's star shots hit enemies. This effect lasts up to 3 seconds and will be removed instantly after dealing normal or charge attack damage. So this is definitely beneficial for characters that do normal or charge attack damage. So you're looking at characters like, for example, like Wanderer, or even like Neuvillette. And speaking of, let's use Neuvillette as an example. Let's take a case where regarding his personal damage, the difference with and without Layla's C4 in this scenario increases his personal damage by about 20%, which is pretty neat, but then when you're looking at a team DPS perspective, it's not the most significant increase. But regardless, for those characters that do want that extra chip damage through their normal and charge attacks, or primarily deal damage through that method, this is a really nice constellation for Layla to have in teams where she is used with these units. Her C5 increases her elemental burst level by 3, which isn't super significant unless you're playing her as like a sort of off-field DPS like playstyle, and even then, it's sort of just okay. And with her C6 definitely also more enables this DPS like playstyle, as her star shots from her skill and her burst will now deal 40% increased damage, and the interval of her night stars being created is decreased by 20%, meaning that the stars from her shield generate basically faster, and you'll get more stars over rotations. So I think in terms of breakpoints, her definite main breakpoints are her C1 and her C4. These are the two constellations that, in my opinion, definitely help Layla the most. For C1 mainly because the increased absorption allows her shield to be overall slightly stronger, and then with her C4, it's generally beneficial in a lot of the teams that she already plays in, which is basically teams that tend to have characters that do normal or charge attack damage, and more specifically the main DPS characters. So that is a very beneficial constellation if you tend to play her with those people. Now moving on to builds, going into the artifacts department. For sets, you can either do general support sets like Tenacity of the Millilith, Noblesse Oblige, or 2 HP variations with Varkasha's Glow and Tenacity, or you can build her more of an off-field damage dealer with something like either Emblem, Blizzard Stray, or if you want to, you can still stick with other supportive sets, as they will be just as effective in some cases. You can also opt for 2-piece builds like 2 HP and 2 Cryo if you want to. For main stats, you want to go HP or Energy Recharge Sands, HP or Cryo Damage Goblet, and for the Circlet, either HP or Crit depending on if you're building her with like Favonius or something and you need the crit rate, or building her more damage based for crit. These options simply just depend on whether you want to build her more of a DPS oriented or a more shielder focused orientation. For weapons, let's first talk about the supportive weapons. So when it comes to the supportive weapons, you typically want to use weapons that give her either HP and or energy recharge. So generally the best picks, if you just have them, you can definitely slot these in with her with ease, is either if you have Key or if you have Dockhand's Assistant. Key has an HP stat and more HP in its passive, although of course the Elemental Mastery increase, it doesn't really matter too much, but still the fact that it has that much HP just makes Layla have more HP and thus gives her a better shield. In a similar case with Dockhand's Assistant, also has an HP stat, you might get a little bit of energy from the passive effect, but the Elemental Mastery portion doesn't matter that much. However, the issue with these two weapons is that they are of course banner limited weapons. There is not currently a free HP sword weapon that you can either craft or you could have gotten from an event. That just does not exist, so you do have to pull for these weapons. And so if you don't have these weapons, then you can go for more energy recharge or some crit weight weapons. So for example, you can do like Favonius Sword. That is a good general one as it generates energy for the team. Pretty good in teams overall that have higher energy requirements in total. And of course, you need to build crit rate to reliably trigger the passive effect to get the particles. You can use something like Primordial Jade Cutter if you really wanted to, as it does give HP in the passive, as well as a slightly minor attack increase that only really matters for her elemental's skill star shots, because that's the one thing that scales with attack, but that doesn't matter too much. And the low base attack high crit rate stat can make it to where if you want to build her more DPS oriented, then it'll be a little bit nicer. And there is of course a niche case where you can use something like Freedom Sworn, although she has to be the one that triggers the reaction to get the stacks. And this is overall just a purely team supportive weapon, as none of the stats in that weapon really benefit her at all. Now for the more DPS oriented build, of course most of the time you want to build her with crit weapons, as they generally have the best performance in this case. So overall something like Primordial Jade Cutter that gives you both crit rate and HP, or you can do crit damage 5-star weapons, so something like Raku or Splendor or Light of Foliar Incision, Mist Splitter. Any of those things, they generally have similar performance, and this is just based on the accessibility of which one that you have. You can use any of those on her as well. You can easily opt for R5 Harbinger of Dawn. Of course, this assumes she's constantly above 90% HP, which means in cases like if you're using her in a Farina team, this might be a little difficult to use. This also applies to scenarios like Corrosion, where your HP is also constantly being drained. Wolfang is a decent option if you just don't have any of those ones and you want to build a more DPS oriented, although it doesn't become that competitive until you get higher refinements, and especially at R5, that's when it begins to compete with something like R5 Harbinger of Dawn. Now as for Layla's teams, so with Layla, she typically is played in either very cryo heavy teams, so we're talking like either freeze or mono cryo, or in teams that don't mind her as like a shield flex. So things like a Nuvolette team with like Nuvolette, Farina, Kazuha, and then like just Layla as like a shield flex, something similar like that. She's also a nice second slot in something like a Double Cryo Melt team, especially when used with a Pyro DPS that wants to melt on field. Her Elemental Burst application, and especially once you have her at higher constellations, so something like C4 or like even C6, where she has that decreased interval and is able to apply star shots more often to keep that cryo aura up. And now before ending this video, I will introduce a demonstration of a team that Layla can be played in. So we'll be introducing this Arlecchino Melt team. So this will be Arlecchino, Bennett, Kaya, and Layla. I'll be doing this demonstration against Triple Genki, so that it'll give a decent idea of her general shield strength. Now of course, my Layla is level 70, so keep that in mind. She is C6, and I do have Dockhand's Assistant on her, But yeah, she is level 70, so it's not as strong as it could be, but it's still relatively nice nonetheless. So I hope that you found this guide useful, and if you did enjoy, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below for more Genshin Impact content. And without further ado, enjoy the demonstration, and until the next video, bye-bye.
Freeze! Don't get frostbite.
Wanted my full attention, did you? This is where